Emily Carter did not notice the moment her marriage began to slip, because it did not break with noise or anger, it softened instead, like a song fading from a radio left on too long, and by the time she sensed it, the silence had already settled into the walls of the house she shared with her husband Daniel and his 17-year-old son Lucas in a quiet town in Maine where mornings smelled of pine and coffee and people believed that decent lives stayed decent if they followed routine. Emily followed routine well. She woke early, made breakfast, drove to her job at the local library, smiled at neighbors, came home on time, cooked dinner, asked about school, asked about work, listened more than she spoke, and told herself that this was what adult love looked like, steady and calm, not loud or dramatic. Yet something had changed. Because Daniel had started answering questions with half sentences and Lucas had started watching her with a look that felt heavier than teenage moodiness. A look that carried thought, choice, and restraint, as if he stood guard over words he refused to release. Emily had married Daniel 3 years earlier after a gentle courtship built on shared grief. Both had failed marriages behind them, both promised honesty as their strongest vow, and when Daniel introduced Lucas to her, Emily had worked hard to earn his trust, helping with homework, cheering at soccer games, listening when he talked about college dreams and late-night fears, and for a long time, it worked. The house felt warm, but warmth can cool quietly, and lately the dinners felt longer, the air thicker, and even laughter seemed careful, measured, practiced. One evening, while setting plates on the table, Emily heard Daniel's voice from the hallway, low and tight, speaking into his phone, and when she leaned slightly to hear, she caught only fragments, words like not yet, she doesn't know, and you promised, and before she could step closer, the call ended, and Daniel walked into the kitchen with a smile that arrived too late, behind his eyes, while Lucas followed him, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the floor, and when Emily asked who was on the phone, Daniel said it was work, too quickly, too cleanly, and Lucas said nothing at all, which stayed with her longer than the lie. That night, Emily lay awake listening to the steady sound of Daniel's breathing beside her, staring at the ceiling fan as it cut slow circles in the dark, wondering when comfort had turned into distance, wondering why Lucas had stopped calling her by the nickname he once used, wondering why she felt like a guest in her own home, and in the morning, she noticed small things that confirmed her unease: Daniel leaving earlier than usual, Lucas skipping breakfast though he once loved her pancakes, doors closing softly but firmly, conversations ending before they truly began. Days passed quickly, filled with normal tasks, but Emily felt as if she were running slightly behind her own life, always arriving after the moment had passed, and one afternoon, while folding laundry, she found a jacket she did not recognize hanging in Daniel's closet, older than the rest, tucked behind winter coats, and when she reached into the pocket, her fingers brushed against paper, folded thin and worn, but before she could open it, she heard Lucas's footsteps in the hall and quickly slipped the paper back, surprised by her own fear, because she had never felt the need to hide curiosity before. Lucas paused at the doorway, his face unreadable, and said Daniel would be late again, then walked away before Emily could respond, leaving behind a feeling she could not name, part worry, part warning. That evening, rain tapped against the windows as Emily sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the chair Daniel usually occupied, replaying the look Lucas had given her, a look that held guilt without blame, and that was when she understood that something had already happened, something not recent, something rooted in the past but growing quietly into the present, and that whatever it was, Lucas knew, and Daniel feared, and she stood between them without knowing the rules of the game. When Daniel finally came home, he kissed her cheek, apologized, asked about her day, all the right words said in the right order, but Emily noticed how his eyes searched her face, not for love, but for signs, and when she asked gently if everything was okay, he said yes, firmly, and changed the subject, while Lucas stayed in his room, door closed, music low, as if even sound might betray him. Later, as Emily washed dishes, she watched her reflection in the dark window and felt the first real crack inside her heart, the understanding that marriage was not just about shared time but shared truth, and that without truth, even kindness could become a form of distance. And as she turned off the lights and walked upstairs, she passed Lucas's room and heard him speaking quietly on the phone, saying, "I know, but she deserves to know," followed by a pause long enough to feel. Then a soft, broken, "I don't know how to tell her," and Emily stopped mid-step, breath caught, hand gripping the railing, realizing that whatever truth waited ahead was closer than she thought, and once she crossed that landing, there would be no turning back. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the phone call she overheard and the way Lucas had looked at her, a mixture of warning and hurt that made her stomach twist, and over the next few days, she tried to observe quietly, noticing the small shifts she had missed before: Daniel leaving for work earlier, his smiles no longer reaching his eyes, a quiet tension in the way he moved around the house, and Lucas retreating further into his room, headphones on, homework abandoned, staring at his laptop for hours without speaking. And Emily felt a strange mix of worry and frustration because she had always believed that love meant honesty, that families functioned on truth, and yet she realized that both Daniel and Lucas were keeping pieces of their lives from her, pieces that now seemed too important to ignore, and the weight of it made her question everything she thought she knew about her marriage. One afternoon, while Daniel was at work and Lucas was supposed to be at school, Emily went into Daniel's study to organize some paperwork and noticed a drawer slightly open, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, letters written in neat, careful handwriting that she did not recognize immediately, but as she read through them, her heart sank, because each one contained admissions of mistakes Daniel had made years ago, decisions that had affected Lucas deeply, choices Daniel had promised never to discuss, letters filled with remorse, explanations, confessions that never reached the people who mattered. And Emily realized that Lucas's coldness was not about her personally but about loyalty and fear, about protecting his father from judgment while holding the burden himself, and suddenly she understood that the distance she felt in her marriage was rooted not in lack of love but in hidden truths that had grown between them like shadows. She tried to confront Daniel gently, bringing up small details, asking casual questions, trying to gauge his reaction, but he always smiled, offered vague answers, deflected, and sometimes left the room, leaving her alone with the unease that had become a constant companion. And Emily noticed how carefully Lucas avoided eye contact now, how he flinched at the mention of certain dates or events, and she started to realize that the two people she loved most were connected in ways she could not penetrate yet, and that whatever she uncovered, it might reshape her entire life, her sense of trust, and her ability to see Daniel the man she thought she knew. Emily spent evenings pacing quietly, thinking of all the small moments she had overlooked, the way Daniel avoided certain topics, the way Lucas had once clutched a photograph tightly before putting it away, the way dinner conversations had grown short, polite, and almost rehearsed, and she understood that the calm she had once mistaken for security was actually the surface of a deeper tension that neither of them wanted to break, and she realized that if she wanted answers, she would have to step carefully, observe closely, and listen for things left unsaid. Over the next week, she watched Lucas more closely, noticing gestures of frustration, quick glances toward his father, moments of hesitation when Emily entered a room, and she began speaking to him with gentle questions, asking about school, hobbies, his day, but each time he replied only in small fragments, deflecting, redirecting, or repeating phrases like "ask my dad," which left Emily frustrated and worried, because she had tried to be a mother figure, to nurture and protect him, yet he now built invisible walls between them that she could not cross without forcing the truth from him. And she began to understand that this distance was a form of love, a protective measure, but one that came at the cost of honesty, trust, and intimacy. One evening, after a long day at work, Emily found herself in the living room, letters from Daniel spread across the coffee table, reading them slowly, realizing how his past decisions, choices he had never shared, had shaped the home they lived in, shaped Lucas's behavior, shaped the air between her and Daniel, and she felt a mix of sorrow, anger, and compassion, because Daniel had acted out of fear and regret, not malice, but fear could be just as destructive as cruelty when it kept people from speaking, and she realized that love required more than patience, it required courage, honesty, and willingness to face uncomfortable truths, and for the first time, Emily wondered if Daniel was capable of that courage, if Lucas would ever trust her enough to let her in, and whether her love for them both could survive a truth so heavy it bent the foundation of her marriage. She spent a restless night thinking, turning the letters over in her mind, memorizing phrases she could not erase, words that revealed Daniel's inner conflict, the things he wanted to confess but could not, and the choices that Lucas had been forced to live with quietly, carrying guilt and protection together like an invisible burden. and she began to understand the depth of Lucas's silence, his avoidance, and even his occasional coldness, realizing it was not directed at her but at the complexity of family loyalty and fear, and that her own role was uncertain, fragile, because stepping too forcefully might break what little trust remained, while stepping too lightly might leave her forever outside the truth. The next morning, she watched Daniel leave for work, his coat brushing against the door frame, his hand lingering slightly on the doorknob as if holding back words he could not say, and she saw Lucas in the window upstairs, staring at the street, his posture rigid, shoulders tense, eyes clouded with thoughts unspoken, and Emily felt the weight of the unspoken. Between them, realizing that the home she had thought was a place of comfort had become a house full of secrets, a delicate balance of love, loyalty, and fear, and she understood that nothing could remain the same once the truth began to surface, because truth has a way of breaking walls, even when love itself survives. That afternoon, Emily tried one last gentle approach, sitting across from Lucas at the kitchen table, a cup of tea between them, asking softly, "Do you want to tell me anything? Anything I should know?" And Lucas looked down, fingers tracing the rim of his cup, breathing shallow, and finally admitted in a voice that trembled, "I know things, about Dad, things you weren't supposed to know yet. He asked me to keep them from you." And Emily's heart tightened, because the betrayal was not directed at her but had still landed like a stone in her chest, and she realized that love could be complicated, layered, sometimes wrong but never simple, and that the path forward would require confronting Daniel, understanding Lucas, and finding a way to rebuild what had quietly fractured, even as the air in their home felt heavier with anticipation, tension, and the unspoken knowledge that everything would change. And Emily knew that once the first truth was spoken, the rest would follow, and there would be no turning back. The rainy evening arrived with a quiet intensity, the kind that makes the world feel smaller and secrets heavier, and Emily sat in the living room listening to the steady rhythm of water against the windows, feeling the weight of the letters she had read, the fragments of conversations she had overheard, and the tension that had grown between her, Daniel, and Lucas, because tonight she knew that the fragile balance of her home could no longer hold without truth spilling into the open. Lucas appeared first, standing in the doorway with a hesitant posture, shoulders stiff, hands gripping the edge of the frame, and Emily could see the conflict in his eyes, loyalty battling honesty, love battling fear, as he took a tentative step inside and whispered, "Mom, there's something I need to tell you, about Dad, about us, about what's been kept from you." And his voice, low and trembling, made Emily's heart tighten, because she realized that betrayal was not always cruel or malicious. Sometimes it was layered with protection, secrecy, and fear, and Lucas was trying to carry it all without shattering her trust. As he spoke, Emily listened without interruption, letting him speak in his own way, describing how Daniel had asked him to remain silent about a choice he had made years ago, a choice that had affected Lucas more than anyone else, a choice that had shaped Daniel's decisions and their lives together, and Emily understood that this was not an act of disrespect but a complicated attempt to preserve the family as Daniel saw it, a flawed but human attempt to control pain, to shelter her from the consequences of a truth he feared might break them all, and yet the silence itself had caused more hurt than the truth ever could. Daniel arrived later, soaked from the rain, tense, hesitant, and when Emily asked him to sit, he looked at both her and Lucas with a mixture of guilt and relief, finally confessing that fear had driven his choices, that he had wanted to protect them from the past, from mistakes he could not undo, and that in doing so, he had allowed a distance to grow between them that neither of them deserved, his voice heavy with remorse, showing a side of him Emily had longed to see, vulnerability and honesty intertwined, the kind of openness that could mend or break, depending on how it was received. Emily felt a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, sadness, love, understanding, as she processed what Daniel admitted and what Lucas had revealed, seeing in Lucas's downcast eyes the tension of years of loyalty and in Daniel's exhausted expression the weight of regret, realizing that what had seemed like a simple marriage and a quiet family life had actually been a delicate web of protection, miscommunication, and unspoken truths, and that every moment she had felt distance, every hesitation she had sensed, was the echo of this hidden history. She struggled with heartbreak and compassion, feeling the sting of deception yet recognizing the human reasons behind it, understanding that both Daniel and Lucas had acted out of love as much as fear, and that forgiveness would require courage, patience, And careful steps, because the kind of betrayal she faced was not about cruelty but about survival and misguided protection, and navigating it demanded emotional strength she hadn't fully tapped before. The room was quiet now except for the rain, and Emily reached out to Lucas first, placing her hand over his, telling him softly that she understood why he had stayed silent, that she did not blame him, and that his courage to speak now meant more than years of silence. And Lucas looked up, eyes glistening, a mixture of relief and lingering guilt, finally allowing a flicker of trust to return, while Daniel watched with tears in his eyes, silently grateful yet terrified that forgiveness might not come. Emily then turned to Daniel, asking questions not in anger but in gentle curiosity, wanting to hear his side fully, needing to understand the choices he had made and why he had kept them hidden. And Daniel answered honestly, without deflection, sharing memories, mistakes, fears, and regrets, admitting that he had underestimated the impact of secrecy, that love alone could not sustain a marriage if honesty was missing, and that he had failed them both in trying to protect them from pain. His words raw, sincere, and heavy with the weight of years unspoken. As the conversation unfolded, Emily felt a shift in the room, a subtle loosening of the tension that had gripped their home, realizing that confrontation and confession, while painful, were necessary to rebuild trust, that the depth of their connection could survive the truth if met with patience and understanding, and that love was not diminished by betrayal but could grow stronger through shared vulnerability. Lucas, encouraged by his mother's calmness, spoke more freely, revealing fears, frustrations, and regrets he had kept hidden, explaining how he had felt caught between loyalty to his father and honesty to her, that he had feared hurting Emily while also fearing losing Daniel's trust. And Emily listened, acknowledging each word, each struggle, recognizing that the journey toward healing would be gradual, that the path forward required compassion for both father and son, and that her own emotions, hurt, love, fear, hope, were all valid and necessary in navigating the complexity of this revelation. Daniel, watching Emily support Lucas without anger, felt the gravity of his choices like never before, and he began to see the possibility of repair, of trust rebuilt through openness, realizing that acknowledging mistakes and allowing space for dialogue was the only way to move forward, and that while the past could not be erased, it could be integrated into a future shaped by honesty and care, a future that required commitment, patience, and humility from all of them. Emily, in turn, understood that her role was not to judge but to guide, to create a safe space for truth and dialogue, to hold love steady while facing pain, and she felt a deep, complex love for both Lucas and Daniel, recognizing that forgiveness was both an act of strength and a choice, that rebuilding trust would take time but was possible if they were all willing to face the truth together. And she resolved that she would meet this challenge with courage and an open heart. The rain continued to fall, soft yet relentless, mirroring the steady release of emotions in the room, washing away years of unspoken fears and hidden truths. And Emily felt that though the night had been painful, it was also a turning point, a moment when betrayal transformed into understanding, when distance became connection, when silence was replaced by words that mattered. And she knew that the path ahead would be difficult, requiring honesty, patience, and effort, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that healing was possible, and that love, tested by truth and betrayal, could survive and even flourish if nurtured with care, compassion, and unwavering attention to the heart of what really mattered. The days after the rainy night felt different in the Carter household, charged with a tension that was no longer heavy with secrets but alive with the possibility of change, and Emily woke each morning with a mixture of hope and caution, knowing that healing would not come all at once, that trust broken over years could not be mended in hours, and yet feeling a quiet determination that love could guide them through if they faced each challenge together. She spent mornings observing Lucas, noting small gestures of reassurance, the way he no longer avoided eye contact, how he asked her opinion on homework or shared a thought about his day without hesitation, and each time he did, she felt a tender warmth in her heart, the kind that comes from seeing honesty replace fear. While Daniel, too, began to shift, arriving home with less tension in his shoulders, speaking openly about work, about memories they shared, even about the mistakes he had made, and Emily noticed the subtle courage it took him to remain vulnerable in front of her and Lucas, courage that mirrored her own need to forgive while protecting the fragile threads of their bond. Evenings became the most important time, A space for conversation and reflection, where they could sit together and talk. Without the interruptions of work or school, where Emily encouraged both Daniel and Lucas to speak freely, to express feelings long buried, and each conversation became a small step toward understanding, a careful negotiation between past regrets and future possibilities, teaching them that love required honesty as much as patience, and that every moment of clarity, every confession, was a gift. No matter how uncomfortable or long delayed, Emily herself found new strength in these days, a resolve that combined compassion with discernment, understanding that forgiving did not mean ignoring pain, that rebuilding trust required acknowledgement of past mistakes while also holding a vision for a healthier future, and she took quiet satisfaction in seeing Lucas slowly relax, the tension in his posture softening, the walls around him lowering, because she knew that his willingness to open up was a sign not just of healing but of his growing confidence in their family, in the possibility that love could coexist with truth. Daniel, observing Emily's patience and Lucas's tentative honesty, began to engage differently as well, taking responsibility openly, sharing both his fears and hopes, apologizing without defensiveness, and demonstrating through consistent action rather than words alone that he was committed to making amends. And Emily realized that reconciliation was not an abstract idea but a daily practice, a series of small choices to act with integrity, openness, and care. Each choice reinforcing the bonds that had been tested and weakened by years of secrecy. Together, they developed small routines that strengthened their connection. Dinners became times to ask about each other's day, to celebrate achievements or talk through frustrations. Weekend activities were shared again, with Lucas suggesting movies or walks and Daniel joining without hesitation. And Emily felt the quiet joy of watching laughter return to the home, not forced or fleeting, but real. Accompanied by moments of reflection, where they could all acknowledge the pain of the past and consciously choose to move forward with awareness, respect, and love. Emily also realized that she had grown in this process, that her capacity for patience and empathy had deepened, that she could navigate heartbreak without losing herself, and that love for Daniel and Lucas could coexist with an understanding of their flaws, that human relationships were complex, layered with mistakes, fear, and hope, and that the willingness to forgive and rebuild was as much a gift to herself as it was to them, giving her a sense of empowerment, quiet pride, and emotional resilience she had not anticipated. As weeks passed, small gestures accumulated into tangible trust. Lucas began to leave notes of thanks or encouragement for Emily. Daniel initiated conversations without prompting. Emily found herself smiling at their interactions without tension or doubt, and even the house seemed to breathe differently, lighter and warmer, filled with the quiet hum of connection and shared presence. And though the past was not erased, it no longer dictated their every movement or word, allowing space for joy, affection, and hope to grow naturally. One night, Emily watched Daniel and Lucas sitting together in the living room, talking and laughing softly, the rain tapping gently outside, and she felt a wave of relief and love, realizing that the betrayal and silence had not destroyed them but had created an opportunity for honesty and deeper understanding, that the challenges they faced had forced all of them to confront fear, regret, and vulnerability, and that these very challenges had forged a stronger foundation for their future if they continued to nurture it with patience, dialogue, and care. Emily also reflected on the lessons learned, that love was not merely about presence but about engagement, that trust required consistent action over time, that family bonds could withstand mistakes if met with empathy and forgiveness, and that courage, the courage to speak, to apologize, to listen, was the true measure of emotional strength, and she felt determined to carry these lessons forward in every interaction, knowing that her choices now would define not only her relationship with Daniel and Lucas but also the emotional environment of their home. As days turned into months, moments of tension still appeared, as they naturally would in any family, but they were handled differently, with discussion rather than avoidance, with curiosity rather than accusation, and Emily noticed the transformation not only in her husband and stepson but also in herself, in her ability to stay centered, compassionate, and honest, to confront discomfort without fear, and to cultivate an atmosphere where all three of them could be vulnerable yet supported, hurt yet healed, confused yet understood, a dynamic that felt alive, real, and sustainable. One morning, Emily stood by the window, sipping her coffee and watching the soft light of winter sunlight illuminate the street, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment and hope, because while they were not perfect, the foundation of honesty, empathy, and shared commitment had begun to take root, promising a future where love was not naive or blind but strong, conscious, and enduring, where mistakes could be faced and forgiven, and where Lucas and Daniel both knew that Emily's love was steadfast, patient, and genuine. She thought about the path they had traveled, the moments of silence, the whispered confessions, the difficult confrontations, the small acts of courage, and realized that while betrayal had tested them, it had also opened a door to deeper connection, that forgiveness had transformed pain into understanding, that patience had reshaped fear into trust, and that the quiet hope she now felt was not fragile but resilient, built on the hard work of truth and emotional honesty, the kind that allowed them to face whatever came next together. Emily understood fully that life would continue to present challenges, that old habits and insecurities might resurface, and that patience, communication, and love would always be required, but she also recognized that they had proven themselves capable of growth, resilience, and genuine connection, that the foundation they were building was sustainable, and that even in the face of past betrayal, their family could thrive emotionally and relationally if nurtured with care, attention, and unwavering honesty. Finally, Emily felt a deep, quiet peace as she watched Daniel enter the kitchen with a cup of coffee for her, Lucas laughing softly at a joke Daniel made, and she realized that though the journey had been painful, it had strengthened the bonds between them, teaching them all that love could survive hardship, that truth could heal, that forgiveness was a choice as much as an act, and that their home, once shadowed by secrets and distance, now shone with hope, trust, and the possibility of new beginnings, proving that even the darkest truths could lead to the brightest futures when met with courage, honesty, and an open heart.